Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Secretary Pete, thank you for spending a morning and afternoon with us in New Jersey. In keeping with that tradition, I will thank Mayor Shelley for hosting us in beautiful Westfield. Mayor Dennis Sullivan of Somerville. We started there this morning and then took the Raritan Valley line to Westfield to show Secretary Buttigieg some of our needs here in central Jersey. And the theme today was seeing just how better transportation is absolutely the key that unlocks a better quality of life in all of these communities, to attracting young families to live here, to inspiring employers to invest here and to create jobs. You all know transportation has been the lifeblood of our New Jersey economy. This state was built to move people and goods between the great cities of this country. And there was a time when we routinely built great things to make that possible. Tunnels and bridges across the Hudson River, gleaming new highways, massive ports and airports. We took pride in what we built. America took pride in what we built here. It was a source of our strength, not just at home, but around the world. So for years, New Jersey has needed our leaders in Washington to get serious about replacing that extraordinary turn of the 20th century infrastructure with more extraordinary 21st century infrastructure. For years, we've waited in vain, watching fewer and fewer late-night comics. Well, the wait is over. The leaders that we helped to elect to the House, to the Senate, and of course to the White House in 2020 are delivering. We have a bipartisan infrastructure deal. It started in the House, in the Problem Solvers Caucus, the bipartisan group that I'm a part of. Now the Senate has turned the framework that we put together into a bill. And while that bill may not give us everything that we want, no compromise could, it does give us everything that we in New Jersey desperately need. It'll create hundreds of thousands of good paying jobs, the kind you can't automate or outsource to another country. After years of unnecessary delay and willful obstruction, it will fund the Gateway project, including a new Hudson Tunnel. And that, in turn, will make possible the direct rush hour trains to New York that Westfield and everybody living along the Raritan Valley line needs. The infrastructure deal will fix what we have, the roads, the bridges, the water pipes that are older in New Jersey than just about anywhere else in the country. There's not a town among the 75 towns I represent that won't benefit in some way from that, but it's also going to move us forward. Anyone who believes, as I do, that America has to move from fossil fuels to clean energy should support this infrastructure bill, if only for the massive investment it makes in our electrical power grid, without which we're not going to be able to plug all those EVs into the source of energy. And there's something else just as important. America needs this infrastructure, but America also needs the proof we are offering in this legislation that it is still possible to find common ground in Washington, that there is still good reason to have faith in our institutions of government, and thus a reason to reject those who want to tear those institutions down. This infrastructure bill fixes or everything I can to encourage the House to move forward, get this deal to the President, everything I can to encourage the House to move forward, get this deal to the President so that he can sign it and we can get to work building great things in New Jersey again. And I have great confidence that that will happen. And Secretary Buttigieg, Secretary Pete, when it does, you are going to have eager and committed partners in New Jersey who cannot wait to start building those great things with you. Governor Murphy, Governor Phil, and Commissioner Diane Scacchetti, they've been leading the charge for Gateway. And I've told them both that they had better clear their schedules for most of next year, because all we're going to be doing in New Jersey is ribbon cuttings on infrastructure projects. Commissioner Scacchetti, would you say a few words? Where are you? Oh, there you are. Wrong way. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank Secretary Buttigieg and Congress's continued progress. Congressman, I know this bill includes significant funding for Gateway, New Jersey Transit, and the Northeast Corridor because of your advocacy, and we are so grateful to have you in Washington fighting for us. This bill makes the largest investment in public transit in history and the largest federal investment in passenger rail since Amtrak was created. For us in New Jersey, that means moving more people around without cars and their associated emissions. And that may seem like a counterintuitive thought for a commissioner of transportation, but transportation comes in many modes, and it has to be balanced. And this bill is going to help us further that balancing, protecting our environment and improving our quality of life. This bill also represents a significant investment in the Gateway tunnels, which you've heard. This was the only project mentioned specifically by the President when he unveiled this initial agreement. Modernizing the tunnel, which is long overdue, will mean moving toward an easier commute for many residents of the 7th Congressional District that make their way into Manhattan every day. And as you know, the tunnels have not been updated for more than 100 years and face significant damage in the wake of Superstorm Sandy. When the infrastructure bill is signed into law, New Jersey stands ready to get started on America's next great infrastructure project. But this bill also invests toward a clean energy future, and this will help us meet both of those goals and targets. Please trust Congressman and Secretary Buttigieg that New Jersey will be good stewards of any federal funds received to advance these important initiatives. Serving as DOT Commissioner has been one of the most humbling and gratifying experiences of my career. And just when I thought it could not get better, I get the privilege to introduce the person who will lead transportation through its most transformative period. Please welcome U.S. DOT Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
Well, big thank you to Commissioner Scacchetti for your work as well as for the kind introduction. I want to thank all of the mayors and local leaders who gathered with us. And of course, I want to thank Congressman Malinowski, somebody I have admired since before he was Congressman Malinowski, who has been encouraging me to come to this district, to see in communities across places like Somerset County, Union County, and the areas that really are as transit and transportation oriented as you can have is. I also want to thank the Raritan Valley Line Mayors Alliance for coming together and demonstrating in a state with a lot of different municipalities how leaders can speak with one voice. I was delighted to meet the Congressman's Youth Advisory Council, which I think is a great idea, and having gotten a chance to meet them gives me that much more optimism for the road ahead and urgency about the future, especially on this day, which is very fitting to be talking about these issues, actually for not one reason but two. One being that legislation that's working its way through the machinery of the Senate as we speak. The other being the landmark IPCC report, a stark warning from the global scientific community about climate change, which I'll say more about in just a moment. I also want to mention that we spent some time today with labor leaders who represent the workers that we have belatedly come to call essential, who have been there day in, day out, making it possible for people to get to work and where they need to be, sometimes at risk of their own health. And of course, we're all still marking the unexpected and saddening loss of AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka late last week. So I'm here to talk about the potential in American transportation as it plays out in communities like those in New Jersey that we were able to see today. In Somerville, we were able to look at transit-oriented development where economic value, but just as importantly, the future of families is being created in development that is happening because of the proximity of a rail line to get to work. But also seeing that trains are taking longer than they should. Not by any fault of the excellent team at New Jersey Transit and others who are operating them, but because we as a country haven't been investing to take them to the next level. As we were meeting with the mayors, one of the themes that came up was the cost of not having that one-seat service to New York. That can add up to the average of 50 minutes for somebody. If you just think about across a lifetime what that means. Or as our host, the Westfield mayor, put it eloquently, that she couldn't always be the parent she wanted to be because of the stress and hassle and time that goes into a commute. We can do something about that. And having seen a few weeks ago, also with Congressman Malinowski, literally in the guts of the Hudson River tunnels, what it means for one of the world's most important economic and human centers to be depending on what amounts to the absolute finest construction technology of 1910. And depending on that in 2021, we see what we're up against. But that brings us to the very good news that we have an opportunity like we haven't had in my lifetime to modernize our transportation infrastructure, to make people's commutes safer, faster, more reliable. And that's exactly what this bipartisan infrastructure framework is going to do, including the largest investment in public transit in our history and the most we've done for Amtrak, for passenger rail, I should say, since Amtrak was created in the first place. New Jersey alone, from the bill that is working its way through the Senate today and tonight and will soon come to the House, New Jersey alone would expect to see over $4 billion for public transportation. And I know that the leaders here in this state know exactly what to do with that funding. There's funding for big projects like the Hudson Tunnel project and the broader Gateway program. Better infrastructure that will mean better commutes and a better quality of life in our communities, as well as creating good jobs, good paying jobs, union jobs, both the jobs working directly on the construction we're going to do and the jobs that are supported by being better able to get in and around these communities. And I do want to say that every transportation decision, every transportation policy, and every transportation bill today is a climate decision and a climate policy and a climate bill, whether we call it that or not. And so it's important on this day, again, with this really shocking characterization of where we are as a society coming from the world scientific community, that we recognize what it would mean if we fully and properly supported public transit and rail as part of how to deal with the fact that the transportation sector is the single biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the U.S. economy. So we're thrilled to see that most rare of sights in today's Washington, which is Democratic and Republican elected leaders working together to advance important legislation. And again, I want to thank all of the leaders who are here for hosting us, for the work that they're doing day in, day out, and to Congressman Malinowski for all that he is doing to help make sure that Americans have the transportation system that we deserve. And with that, I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Thank you, Secretary. And thanks to all the mayors and county officials who came out here. The Secretary mentioned this is a bipartisan process in Washington. It's been a bipartisan process in New Jersey for obvious reasons, and we're going to hold this coalition together as we realize this vision. We're going to go to Kyle Mazza of UNF News first.
Thank you very much, Congressman, and thank you, Secretary. I wanted to ask, a lot of the progressives in both the Democrats, the Republicans, some progressives aren't happy. They say this bill doesn't go far enough. Are you worried that the bill won't pass? And what is your message to those who right now? Thank you so much, Secretary.
Sure, I'll start on if you have any other thoughts. But what I would say is that this is, first of all, a historic investment. Again, we've not seen something like this in my lifetime. Depending which category you look at, overall, we're getting about 2/3 of what the president first put forward. And what the president first put forward is a generational investment, so that continues to be the order of magnitude that we're on. It is not perfect. No one got everything that they wanted, which is the fundamental character of any compromise legislation. But what we didn't compromise on was the idea that there needs to be a historic level of investment that will really change America's readiness for the future. And it speaks to goals that I believe are shared across the aisle. Just as we have a bipartisan group here, we have that bipartisan group advancing this legislation. When was the last time you saw the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO pulling in the same direction? To me, that's evidence that we are on the right path, and it's also part of why I think you see such amazing momentum for this on Capitol Hill.
I'll just say categorically this is going to pass the House. It's going to pass the House with overwhelming Democratic support, and that's going to happen because this is not just rebuilding Eisenhower's interstate highway system for the 98th time. And that was the test for most Democrats. This is about doing something as big and as bold today as the interstate highway system was in the 1950s. And it's big and bold because, as we both mentioned, it's not just fixing the old stuff that needs to be fixed, as important as that is. It's taking us forward. It's taking a giant leap forward towards the clean energy future that is necessary not just to defeat the threat of climate change, but to seize the opportunity for America to be the country that masters and markets the technologies of the future. So between the electrical vehicles, the massive investment in the electrical grid, the investment in water infrastructure, we didn't even mention the broadband. It's not transportation, but for rural areas, underserved areas, and we've got them in New Jersey. This is going to be transformational in delivering broadband to every single child who needs it to be able to get a good education. There's going to be a lot of work to do politically in the House. We've got another bill, a budget reconciliation bill, that we're working on. I see these as basically, we have several planes up in the air trying to come in for a landing in stormy weather. And we have air traffic controllers, our leadership in the House and the Senate, that are going to bring those planes down. I'm not sure what order or exactly when, but I'm absolutely certain the House will pass this infrastructure bill.
And former President Trump, going back to his comments on infrastructure.
You know, there are people in this country who want to create jobs, and there are people in this country who want to create chaos. You know what side I'm on.
Very good.
I'm the MC. We're going to go to Colleen Wilson.
Secretary Buttigieg, could you kind of explain the $4 billion figure that you said would trickle down to New Jersey, and what that number includes, and also how this could help the mayors here, and around the state? Like what kind of stuff that
Sure. Yeah. So that's just one example of what's in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's that if you look at the overall scope of what's being proposed for public transportation, and then you kind of run the numbers on the formulas and how much public transportation is here in New Jersey, New Jersey's share of that would amount to about $4 billion. There would also be $6.8 billion that you would expect to be New Jersey's share of the highway funding that's going to come. $1.1 billion for bridges. There are a lot of bridges, some holding up rail, some roadways, and some both, that need a lot of work. In fact, there are over 500 bridges just in the state of New Jersey alone that are considered in poor condition. And that's not a New Jersey problem. That's just a New Jersey example of an American problem. So those are some of the examples of what's in it for New Jersey when you look at the scale and the scope of this bill. And what it means for transit authorities, for Commissioner Scachetti's colleagues at the State Department, for mayors who will also be able to apply for discretionary programs and other things that aren't even in the numbers I just mentioned, is a chance to supercharge work that they have been wanting to do and preparing to do for a long time, but that we've got to do sooner rather than later.
And speaking of the numbers you didn't mention, right, there's also the funding for Amtrak for the Northeast Corridor, funding for what we call projects of regional and national significance, which you can read as code language for the Gateway Project and a couple of other mega projects around the country. So when you add all that up and combine it with the regular grant funding that the Secretary mentioned, this is a huge deal for New Jersey. If you run the numbers on this and you look at a number that we hate to quote but have to quote in New Jersey, the shortfall between what we send to Washington every year in taxes and what we get back, you all know we're basically last place in the country. If you take the infrastructure funding, other parts of President Biden's agenda, and something that was unveiled today as part of the budget reconciliation bill being considered by the Senate, namely addressing the cap on the SALT deduction. If you put all of those things together, all these things that I've been fighting for, you're going to see a huge shift in that number in terms of money coming back to New Jersey compared to money that we're sending in. So this is a great deal for us. We're going to go to Peter from CBS.
Once this has passed, how soon will the dollars flow? And when it comes to Gateway, what hurdles don't have to be cleared, and how quickly might that start?
Yeah, so, one thing I do want to emphasize, this is different from 2009 and the stimulus bill, which is really about getting dollars out into the economy as quickly as possible to deal with the recession. What we're doing here is we're getting dollars out as quickly as possible and sustaining that for a vision that's going to carry us through the 2020s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. So some of the things that are possible through this bill will happen immediately. And I'm thinking about that list, an arm's length long, that every mayor has and every state leader has of things that they would be able to do right away if they only had the funding. And then there are other things that actually aren't shovel-ready projects. They're shovel-worthy projects that we need to support, not just putting them into the ground, but actually doing some more of the planning and the development. So that's kind of the full answer. The simple answer is some of this will happen the moment the president signs it. My department can get to work deploying those dollars. But this is really, again, to get us through not just the next year or two, but really the next era. As regards the Gateway, that's a good example of where there are some projects that are closer to being ready to go than others. So some moving through, and then there are parts further out. So the tunnel project, for example, that's just one of a whole series of bridges, tunnels, and other projects that are needed before you can really say that we have a full 21st century system connecting everything that needs to be connected. And a lot of that will play out over the years to come.
But there still are hurdles that might be a problem.
I mean, this is a project of enormous. This will be one of the most complex and expensive public works projects in American history. So there will certainly be more challenges and hurdles in the years ahead. But I think up until now, the single biggest obstacle across all of the different complexities of engineering and permitting and cooperation, the biggest obstacle has been funding. And this is our chance to do something very big about that biggest obstacle. All right.
Well, and another obstacle was that your predecessor somehow lost the environmental impact statement for about 3 years, and you found it somewhere in your office. So look, it's getting the approvals, which is an important process, but was artificially stopped by the last administration. It's getting the funding, which we're doing through this legislation. But as we were discussing in there with the mayors, that's not where it stops. Once all of that is signed, sealed, and delivered, we're going to transition to a conversation about the speed of delivery. And I'm going to be relentless in pressing our state authorities, our federal authorities, along with our whole delegation, to make sure that this gets done sooner than has been projected, because folks in this community, they don't want to wait 10 years to have 2 tunnels and 1 seat ride and the quality of life improvements that go with it. I think we have time for one more, maybe right over here.
Larry Hicks from NJ.com and the Star Ledger. This one is for the Transportation Secretary. Aside from Gateway, what were some of the more pressing things you heard from the mayors as far as needs of transportation?
Well, we heard about a number of different issues that are all impacting people's commutes. We heard about the proposed Hunter flyover. I think that's Hunter, right? That is needed because otherwise you have a situation crossing a rail bed where the slightest disruption can cascade and set people back in their ability to get to where they need to go. We heard about the interplay between freight and passenger rail, which is also, I should mention, something contemplated in the president's recent executive order on competitiveness. Often passenger and freight rail share the same rails, which is fine, but we need to make sure that that doesn't present obstacles to people getting to where they need to go on time. There was, as we mentioned, a lot about the Gateway projects. There was a lot about bus commuting, and one mayor memorably pointed out that a 52-mile commute on certain bus-dependent pathways can be anywhere between 1 and 5 hours. We heard a lot about the creation of economic value, the number that one mayor put forward that he had heard of a 1 minute difference in commute time translating to about a $10,000 difference in property property values. It was great to be able to hear all of these concrete examples of why transportation funding and transportation efficiency matters. But they clearly all boil down to one simple thing, which is that communities, families, livelihoods depend on the ability to get to where they need to be. And that as mayors who, of course, get the phone call, every mayor, every county leader knows what it is to manage things you don't own and own things you don't control, right? They're getting the phone call whether they have the single-handed ability to fix some of these issues or not. That's why I'm determined that the federal government be a better partner, starting with these dollars, to help them get the job done on the ground. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for the chance to be together. Oh, great.